Mr. Yang, about the latest news about China likely to do a military drill in the South China Sea starting from this week until later on Thursday. What do you make of the timing of this, particularly when the U.S. Admiral is visiting China at the moment?
Well, obviously, the military drills in recent period looks like more frequent than before, but that is the part of the picture. The other part of the whole picture, the other part of the whole picture has been U.S. military patrols, surveillance, and activities in South China Sea suddenly increased, much more frequent than before. So that's a corresponding or reactive action from PLA. And I believe the authorities choose this timing when the Admiral mentioned the visit Beijing to show the attitude from PLA, say, if you increase your military activities here, and so do we. And if you really want to calm down the situation, welcome.
All right. May I just follow up by asking you, will there be a further build-up from all sides of the militaries as a result of the ruling?
Well, ruling, when we talk about ruling, the U.S. think and have been doing, say, they are trying to rewriting the rules in South China Sea. Before 2010, the situation here was basically stable, although there have been disputes because 2002, China and ASEAN reached a very good document, we call it the DOC. And now we are preparing for COC. That's all the efforts for writing rules.
So will there be further military build-up as from your perspective?
It's up to the situation developments. If U.S. really increase military activities here, say militarization, then China has to increase some military build-ups.
I did notice, Mr. Yang, you didn't mention much about the Philippines. So may I go to the Filipino panelists that are joining us. Professor Hidarian, what do you think at this moment, President Duterte's approach to the disputes in the South China Sea to China?
Right, as I've been as I have discussed with you guys in previous times that we discussed, Duterte's likely foreign policy. The priority for President Rodrigo Duterte is to open up communication channels with China, is to engage China and to have dialogue with China on the South China Sea issue, and not to provoke China. And he made it very clear a few hours into his inauguration on June 30 that he's not going to flaunt the verdict by The Hague, no matter how favorable it is to the Philippines or unfavorable to China, in order to taunt China. He's not interested in provoking China. He's interested in a constructive, dialogue-based resolution of these disputes. That is why President Duterte made sure that the Philippine government will develop a very sober and self-restrained position on the Hague verdict, because he wants to reopen communication channels with China.
Right. Professor Hidarian, let me just ask you about the technical issues from your country. First of all, President Duterte asked former President Ramos to be the representative of him to do this negotiation. However, we also heard from former President Ramos, he said, I'm already 88 years old. It is not disrespect to you, Mr. President, but I'm too old to do this. So at this moment, do we see any serious plans coming from the Filipino side to form, first of all, a delegation and a clear plan as to how the Philippines would like to approach China when it comes to negotiations? From your perspective, sir.
Well, based on the information I have, it's most likely that former President Ramos will actually serve as a special envoy to China to kick off communication channels that have been frayed and have been essentially frozen in the last 3 or 4 years under the Aquino administration. Of course, his age is an issue, but I'm sure he's going to also assemble the leading experts in the Philippines to help him up. So he's not going to take up this job on his own, on himself alone. But the choice of Ramos is very important. First of all, he has the ultimate trust and respect of Rodrigo Duterte, to a point that Rodrigo Duterte said that if not for the encouragement of the former president, he would not have run for office. And he thanked him very specially during his inauguration speech. So the two guys are very close, and FVR has very much respect of Duterte. The second thing is, Ramos has a very good track record of dealing with the South China Sea issues and with China. Remember in 1995, the Philippines and China had the mischief reef crisis, almost confrontation. And during the time, the president was Ramos. So despite the fact that Ramos was facing some sort of a territorial conflict with China, he immediately dispatched his top diplomats and later on also met with Jiang Zemin and the top leaders in China. He also kick-started negotiations in the ASEAN that found its denouement or denouement in the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. So Ramos has this very astute, a very deft track record in dealing with China. And among all former Filipino presidents, I think he's the only president who's still alive and who's not very controversial or doesn't have a major baggage. So I think he's the perfect delegate to kickstart negotiations with China. Now, what is the game plan of the Philippines? I think as far as the Philippine position is concerned, they feel that they already scored a slam dunk victory against China. Of course, I know China doesn't accept the verdict. They call it null and void. But from the Philippine position, they feel that they have the legal upper hand. But the fact of the matter is that China has the military operational upper hand. So the negotiations will be about how the Philippines can translate its legal victory into actual compromises on the ground. So it's very important for the two countries to find a common ground, especially on how we deal with the Scarborough Shoal, which could be a very dangerous flashpoint in the South China Sea in the coming months.
All right, Mr. Yang here. Here are very interesting relationship here. So apparently, it is China and the Philippines in a territorial dispute. And there was a arbitrational ruling. The Philippines have been awarded with a sweepingly favor, while China does not recognize, does not accept. But on the other hand, when you look at the military possible confrontations, it is not between China and the Philippines. It is between China and the US that is now doing patrols in the South China Sea. And we all understand, as some scholars have pointed out, it is a proxy conflict in the names of the Philippines, in fact, between China and the United States, as some say. So, Mr. Yang, may I ask you about this? What do you make of the current situation of Duterte administration inside the Philippines? How can he be able to walk this tightrope in a way? He is the ally, the Philippines, of the United States. But at the same time, the neighbor really is China. Mr. Yang.
Well, let's make the July 12th as a turning point, the date the arbitration presented the so-called final award. Before July 12th, there had been a triangle game between China, the Philippines, and the United States. To some degree, the U.S. played a more fundamental role in this game. But now, the new president of the Philippines launched the new approaches and tactics, and China welcome. I agree with my Philippines colleagues' remarks. Say, former President Ramos was a proper delegate to bridge the two governments, because not only because of the reasons he mentioned, but also Ramos is a long time of Chinese friend. No problem. It's a proper person. But on the other hand, in terms of the legal basis, he mentioned that the upper hand or on this side or on the other hand. So in terms of the legal basis, the arbitration is illegal.
All right. We will not go into a debate about the arbitration because we've been debating that for weeks, and now we focus on what's the next step, because China has already stated very clearly it does not recognize, will not implement, and the Philippines said it is in our favor. Let's just put that aside because we're going to talk about a dialogue. So let's just see how a dialogue would proceed. Mr. Yang, from
I
our
really
perspective.
hopeful. I think the situation is very hopeful. Number one, if the Philippine government exclude the outside factors, say exclude the U.S. influences, then the negotiation between China and the Philippines can go in smooth way. And secondly, the negotiation between the two sides should be based on, number one, historical facts, and number two, the international law.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Professor Heydarian, also you don't want to filibuster the whole conversation, so briefly from you, what would that mean? Because President Duterte today already made his remarks talking about during the negotiations with China, if it could come true, he and the Filipino delegation is going to take care or take into consideration, in his words, the interests of the allies. Politically correct, of course, that's a statement, but would that mean also things could become ever more complicated?
I mean, Duterte, without a question, Duterte is now under pressure from all sides. From the side of China, he's under pressure not to flaunt and taunt the verdict, because Duterte has the option of saying that, well, because the verdict says that China occupies no islands, that it only occupies low tide elevation, therefore Duterte can call upon the United States and Japan and other countries to conduct what they call freedom of navigation operations, or under the enhanced defense cooperation with U.S. to give them more military access so that U.S. will have more military presence close to the Scarborough Shoal. But I think so far Duterte has made it very clear that he wants to have a much more independent and flexible foreign policy. So he's not going to abandon the allies, but he wants some wiggle room. Remember, Thailand and South Korea, or even Turkey for that matter, are also U.S. allies, either through NATO or through bilateral treaty alliances.
Right.
But these countries have had relatively independent foreign policy when it comes to China. So I don't think that just because the Philippines has a treaty alliance with the United States, that should tie its hand. Remember, during the Gloria Macapagal administration in the Philippines, we were still an ally of U.S., but we were able to actually have very robust relations with China. So I think this is what Duterte will try to do. And the aim here is to make sure that, first of all, in Scarborough Shoal, there will be no conflict, and hopefully we can find an understanding on how to perhaps share resources or to at least avoid military conflict in that area.
Okay, and Mr. Yang, we only got 40 seconds for you, but we need to let you speak in order to balance the conversation. Everybody have a say. So, Mr. Yang, what do you make if there were thoughts about having a negotiation with the Philippines? How would China prepare for it? And how would the U.S.-China relation not to complicate further the relation with China and Philippines?
Very simple. Two sides, both Philippines and China, should exclude any external factor effects. And then number two, based on the common ground, say both Philippines and China look for joint development, and then for negotiate or bargain the differences. Based on the joint development, we have built up trust and then solve the differences.